Hello, good evening, good afternoon. I hope everybody is very, very well. And let's see who we've got in the chat. Hello, Ben Shaw. Hello, Trevor, or Trevor, as we call it. Yes, oh, thank you. I wrote that a long, long time ago. Warm, hazy days. I remember writing that. It was just sat in the back garden. I was just messing about with a new guitar tuning, and 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 I was just doodling about, and that little slide just, oh, I like that. And I just extended it, and extended it, and it just sounded pretty nice actually. And how can it was dadgad tuning. It was at the time I just got a real enjoyment for dadgad tuning. It's just sounds like whatever crappy guitar you've got is sound like a beautiful harp. Good afternoon, Sir Larry the cat. I hope the new owner of number 10 is still respecting the house and not leaving his briefs and all his dodgy socks all over the place. And good afternoon, one angry pagan. Hope you're all very, very well. And say, oh, thank you, Howard. Yeah, I wrote it, but it's a good 8 years ago. And it's mostly on from my old channel, but I'll say when you're not having the old cameras and sounding that cracking, you're not going to get many views. But at the time, I was just in to like experiment with what I was doing. But anyway, what we'll do is we'll just crack on. I don't know if you watched the first of this Justice Committee meeting where we were talking about prison accommodation and all that, and we had all them what you call experts on who were basically he's cleaner than Spafford, but most people are. Yes, I totally agree, Sir Larry. Just hope he's not leaving all that hair gel all over the place though. Yeah, but yeah, as I say, they had 3 experts on we had yesterday. As I say, this, if you want to hear yesterday, we're from January the 9th, and it was in the Justice Committee, and it was just quite an interesting, very, very interesting meeting with these witnesses, all experts and all very, very good. And I think without further ado, I will allow these further guests to introduce themselves. And I think, if I remember rightly, these were more into the situation, with women in prisoners in women prisons, and it's very, very interesting. And unfortunately, you will still have to suffer the man who with an infeasibly large forehead and with Angela Rayner still camped inside there. Yes, we all know Mr. James Daly. He's there, unfortunately, but it's very, very interesting. This is just a little bit over an hour again, so it's not like some of them where you get about 2 hours of asking mundane and interesting questions. You know what I mean? It's just about an hour, and it's very, very interesting. Good afternoon, Simon says. Hope you're well. Yes, Sergio, that's a euphemism. Oh, we're not going to go there. But anyway, I'll let these new witnesses introduce themselves, and they'll just crack straight on. But very, very interesting what they have to say.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us, Chair and Committee. I'm Anne Fox. I'm the Chief Executive of Clinks, the infrastructure charity in England and Wales for criminal justice, charities and social enterprises.
And it's Judge Rinder, the 20 pencil a day man. We all remember him from yesterday's live stream.
Hello, I'm Mark Day. I'm the Deputy Director at the Prison Reform Trust. We're a charity that works to improve treatment and conditions in prison and reduce the unnecessary use of imprisonment. Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm Sonia Ruparel. I work for Women in Prison. I'm the Chief Executive. We work in 6 women's prisons, and we also work in the community with women in contact with the criminal justice system.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you. Now, you've heard some of the conversation we've had with the previous panel, so we needn't repeat all of it, but some of it we'll come back to, and we're interested in your take on. We talked a lot at the beginning about the projections of prison population and so on. Any different views from those that you've already heard about reliability or otherwise of the projections, or do they seem pretty accurate?
I would largely cohere with what was said in the previous panel. I mean, there's always going to be uncertainty associated with any projection. And indeed, in the kind of latest projection, there were differences in terms of what actually happened versus what was projected.
Indeed.
So the projection saw a slight fall in the remand population, whereas actually it rose.
Yes, indeed.
But I think what was noticeable was that the actual trend was largely in line with the top line figure. So I think what a previous panelist said was that the general trajectory seems to be right, but obviously there's going to be variation.
Of course, yeah. The previous panel talked about things that perhaps could have been done to anticipate this. And from your perspective, your organisations, I mean, should this have been anticipated more? What would you suggest should have been done, if anything, earlier to try and anticipate and perhaps deal with this potential?
I think it wasn't just anticipated, it was known. These are projections based on who you're sending. And I think the biggest thing for us in the voluntary sector is that we need to understand that prisons are attempting to address societal issues.
Yeah.
So, you asked the previous panel about the presumption against short sentences.
Yes.
And I think one of the benefits for us is that we'll wire into the system the fact that we won't send people who are dependent on substances facing multiple disadvantages to prison for very short periods of time when they can get nothing which will address those drivers, but lose everything else that they have, and more likely, therefore, to reoffend when they come out. I think focusing resources on the front end of the system and looking at reversing that increase that we've seen in punitive policy. Now, that might not be politically palatable and very popular, but it's absolutely something that needs to be done. And I think the Lord Chancellor has started to grapple with this, so that October statement has looked at some things that might not be very palatable to others, but they are what's needed, I think, to make an effective change. The remand population, the ageing population, the short sentence population, they just drive all of these issues.
Thanks.
I'll
come to you, Sonia, after that, because I've got another question for you as well.
Well, there are obviously elements which are going to be more in the government's control than others. But I think what was clear was that over the course of the projection, the government were legislating in a number of areas to increase the length of time people were serving in prison. And there would be little doubt that those measures would put additional pressure on the prison population going forward. I think a question I might ask of the government now is looking at what is currently before Parliament. So in the sentencing bill, yes, that bill includes proposals to introduce a presumption on short sentences. It also includes changes to sentencing for serious sexual offences too, which will put quite significant pressure on the population going forward if they are introduced. Now, when they were originally proposed by the Lord Chancellor in October last year, he did say that that wouldn't be enacted unless they could guarantee sufficient prison places. Now, I think it would be helpful for this committee to interrogate a little further on that, because what does that actually mean in practice? We know that any measure such as this is going to be putting long-term pressure on the prison system going forward for decades, not just for a matter of years. So, in a sense, you are accountable to governments many, many years in advance. So what that actually means in practice, I think, would be interesting to know.
Thanks. Sonia.
Thanks. I just wanted to make a comment on the projections for the women's population.
Yes,
because the women's prison population is projected to rise to 3,800 by this November, then up to 4,300 next year, which is a significant rise. And just when you were asking about whether that's reasonable, feasible, is it known? We don't really know where those projections have come from the women's estate. We believe they were just extrapolated from the data for the men's estate. So it's unclear if they're real and reasonable and likely to be right. However, it is going up. Just to Anne's point, 22% of women are on remand, of the women in custody at the moment. So that's quite a high number of women in prison who are on remand, and 58% of women are on sentences of less than 12 months. So I think that if the government had enacted the female offender strategy that was delivered in 2018, then I assume if it had actually been successful, we would have seen a reduction in the women's prison population, which we have not seen. We've seen the reverse.
That's what I was going to raise with you. It seems to contradict the female offender strategy, which is posited upon reducing the number of women in prison. But
is that Sir Roger Gale? He looks like he's probably skinned up himself. He looks ready to fall asleep. Either that or he's had a massive Sunday roast. But I have to say, you guys crack me up. Yeah, this guy wants Sir Larry. He's been practicing very hard in front of the mirror to say the word. Islamophobia reminds me of Crichton trying to say smeghead. This guy wants everybody to shut up and skin up. Yes, skinning up now, yes. Puff, puff, pass on, pass. Don't bogart the joint. Pass the Dutchie on the left-hand side. This is an interesting question. Neurodiversity, disparity in prisons needs to be addressed with special wings or something, or support advisors. Very interesting. Yeah. Because, like, yeah, I can, yeah, it makes a good point there, actually. I've only ever visited two prisons as a teen, to visit my ex-stepdad, HMP, Exeter and HMP Dartmoor. Oh dear. I bet that, I can imagine, even at that age, that'd have been quite a harrowing experience for you. Blimey. So, pass the doobie to the left-hand side, but don't leave the bearded guy out. Exactly. But we'll let the rather relaxed Sir Roger Gale, who's clearly been passing the doobie around by the looks of it. He looks quite chilled.
projections are to go otherwise. And I think you're saying to me, Sonia, that actually the numbers in practice have gone up as well. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yeah. But why? Is it possible to explain, do you think?
It's a good question. I don't think women have become more criminal over that time period. So I think it is about that much more punitive nature of the sentencing, the increase in the number of women on remand. We don't, back to the conversation earlier, we don't know why women are particularly placed on remand. We know that it affects black and minoritized women more, and that's likely to continue. But we assume that many women are put on remand for their own protection because they're experiencing poverty, homelessness, domestic violence and abuse. And so if we're not looking at the reasons that they're going in on remand, we're not dealing with the issues that they're facing and the reasons they're causing the offences in the first place.
Which were all issues which the government referred to and flagged up in their own female offender strategy as indicating reasons why you want to reduce the number of women in prison, it seems.
And a very good strategy, which we were all very supportive of at the time. I think if you look at since the Corston report and the publication of the strategy, you look at the gendered aspects of poverty and disadvantage and the things that are driving those things. And as long as you still have the ability to send someone to prison as a place of safety, or send somebody to prison because there isn't mental health treatment, there isn't anywhere for them to live, or there isn't any substance misuse services, then that's what you're going to get. The other thing I wanted to say about what they could have done differently is in the COVID period, there were a number of proposals that they made and that we made. Like, I ran a reference group for them for the 18 months of voluntary sector leaders and early release schemes and all of these ideas, but nothing really amounted to much. Very, very small numbers. And you could have achieved, I think, quite lasting change by being braver at that time. And maybe it was because of the other pressures that were coming up with the overcrowding and staffing, I think, being one of the main things. But that, to me, seemed a really missed opportunity. And I think if things were done differently in the COVID period, particularly about release and the proposals around women, the amount of work that went in for the small yield is a real shame.
Thanks. That's very helpful. Thank you. Mr.
That's quite interesting. What do you guys think? What the young lady said? That's very about being braver. Very interesting. What do you guys think? I have a funny feeling this might be massive forehead man time. I could be wrong.
Mr. Timpson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask you some of the questions that sort of obviously quite similar to some of those that you've already heard from the first panel, but all the more important that I ask them. First of all, in relation to the suspended short sentences that was announced back in October last year, and understanding what impact we think that might have, clearly in its very early days, but what do you believe it will have in terms of an effect on the overall size of the prison population? From Sonia's point of view, I'm particularly interested in relation to women, bearing in mind the figures. I think 58% you said of women who are on effectively a short sentence. I don't know who would like to start. Maybe Sonia, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'm very happy to. So we think it's a good thing, this announcement by the Lord Chancellor. As I think the presumption against short sentences will make a difference to the women's prison population, given that extraordinary number, and given that 69% of women are in prison for non-violent offences as well. So there's a kind of an obvious link there. So we do welcome it. We do have concerns about how it will actually be achieved in practice without the proper investment, I guess, in the services outside of prison, in the community, and in the probation service. We recognise that the impact assessment part of the bill, the Act, said that there needed to be that commensurate increase in probation funding, but that's going to take a long time to deliver. So there's a concern, really, that actually what might happen is women will have that presumption against short sentences and then breach orders and end up in prison anyway and become criminalised as a result. So if it's not put properly into practice with the commensurate investment in the community and in probation, then we are concerned about it, but it's a step in the right direction.
I'm sure the others want to contribute to that, but whilst you're doing that, Anna, I think there's an opportunity here, maybe it's the missed opportunity you were talking about earlier, for the voluntary sector to help some of those who may no longer be potentially having a short sentence, but will be having a community sentence, and providing some of those services.
Yeah, I think there absolutely is, and there's quite a lot of learning from the last few years from community sentence treatment requirement work that obviously the committee itself had quite a lot to say about. But there have been delivery issues and investment issues with those schemes, and I think one of the things that we really need to think about is how will we educate and support magistrates and all sentencers to have, I suppose, that sentencer confidence that I think is always presumed about prison, but doesn't necessarily meet those driving factors for why people have ended up in front of your bench in the first place. But how can we get that confidence that there is a service that you could send people to, or there's a support there? You know, the majority of people sentenced for very short sentences or anything under 12 months, generally there, because we talk about they've ended up in the criminal justice system. You know, other things have gone wrong, probably throughout life, and the root cause is probably better met elsewhere. There is a paucity of provision, but there is a lot of organisations with the right investment and with the right partnership working and commissioned in the right way who could step in tomorrow. You know, they have, some of that has been decimated, and sorry to come in front of the committee and say transforming rehabilitation. Again, I'd hope not to. But, you know, those, I think somebody in the previous panel talked about the Lord Chancellor having to undo or live with the decisions of predecessors, and no more so than this, the impact on the probation service. I think also looking at how does the probation system work with the voluntary sector? How can the voluntary sector work with people on underlying needs, on the things that they will need, on those desistance factors, in a way that isn't linked to their supervision and management? Yes. That you don't have to become a responsible officer. And also taking out, if that's going to be successful, I think longer term, that could fundamentally change who goes to prison and what prison's seen as being for, and particularly that churn of people going in for things. You know, you can work on more purposeful activity for people that are in prison for longer if you haven't got a massive churn of people who are drug dependent coming in for 60 and 70 days. But we've got to figure out how to take more people out of probation intensive management, and the introduction of post-sentence supervision under TR has not worked. It has given people supervision but not support. So it's led to increased recall, and what we need is a system that helps people to get the support that they need, and that doesn't have to be mandated. So many of our members and organisations in the sector will be more than happy to work with people with sufficient funding without having to be licensed revokers and recallers and responsible officers. That's not what we do best.
Very interesting. So what I like about these select committees, when you get experts like these, you know, you seem to learn a hell of a lot more, don't you? And yeah, not really. Yeah, to say one angry pagan. Yeah, that's an interest. Community services service to make a major comeback. Don't see much of it these days. What's your thoughts on community service? I can imagine there's a place for it, isn't there? Surely. And yes, Sir Larry the cat always asking the important questions. Man behind his competition for the massive forehead man. You know, if I'm honest, when you look at this lass, she's surrounded by she's in the world of the massive foreheads. I think it's a case of in here that the person with the at least 2 strands of hair is king or queen in this. Yes. Yes. Remember him? I do remember him. He was in the first meeting, wasn't he? Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully that's nice memories for you, Smith. You know, she talks like my mum, Dublin accent. She's got a lovely, soothing and warm accent, hasn't she? I've always enjoyed the Irish accent. Something quite warm and soothing. Yes. Don't you worry. He'll be coming up to Larry. I'm dreaming about Angela Rayner's council house as well. And there's a massive forehead, really small face. Chrome domes, yes, absolutely. Kind of remind me, she's in the world of Tefal, isn't she? Remember them adverts? Yeah, the Tefal. Yes. When I look at it, it just reminded me of the Tefals. Anyway, let's continue.
Mark, anything you want to add to the...
Yes, I mean, I think it's important to sort of distinguish the kind of reasons why this might be a beneficial proposal. I think, first of all, a presumption would be a good thing in and of itself if it led to fewer short sentences being passed and that there wasn't up-tariffing, which is obviously always a potential risk. And one of the reasons for that is because we know that compared to short sentences, compared to community orders and suspended sentences, have a much worse record in terms of reoffending. So there will be a benefit regardless of its impact on the prison population itself. A presumption will have greater impacts in terms of demand reduction in certain prisons than others. It will have a greater impact on women's prisons, where a higher proportion of women are on short sentences. It will also have hopefully an impact in reception prisons in terms of reducing the churn, in terms of the numbers of people coming in and out on short sentences. But we do need to be realistic overall about the impact this will have in terms of reducing levels of demand. And it's the difference, obviously, between the stock and flow figure in terms of the prison population. Only about 4% of people in prison overall are on a short sentence. So even if all of those people ended up not getting a short sentence, it's not massive numbers of people, but it will have an impact, and it definitely would be a good thing in and of itself, and it is an important policy for the government to be pushing.
I think it's only fair to also ask you the question around the proposal to rent out prison places. You can either wax lyrical about it, give it short shrift. What are your views about any potential benefits or pitfalls that approach could have on thinking about it from the prison capacity perspective?
Hello, Reagan. I'll lay it up you well.
I want to have a go.
I think it's a massive distraction at a very busy time, a time where we're facing a number of crises. It was a surprise to very many people. Obviously, it was made in a party conference speech. But I think the sector was up in arms. People were very distressed about where it had come from. It flies in the face. I was Lord Farmer's deputy chair on his review into family ties of men in prison. The family considerations. Who's going to be picked? How do you pick people? And how do you make sure that they get what they should get from this system in another country. I think the amount of time that it's going to take to broker any kind of deal is going to have little to no impact, even in the medium to long term, and then you're going to have an extra kind of almost like a subsystem to look after. We already send people in this country to prison in another country. Mr. Simpson, probably some of your constituents in HMP Berwyn. So we've got people all over the place, dotted around. We've got Welsh women go to prison in England. We already know that doesn't really work very well. So we're really not fans. I have got the assurance that the voluntary sector will be able to be involved as the detail gets drawn up. But I suppose if there was one thing they wanted off their desk, this is a thing that I would drop.
Anyone else?
Yes, I think it is a very expensive and very complicated way of increasing prison capacity. Just looking at the legislation that's currently before Parliament, it just leaves so many questions unanswered, and indeed it leaves much of the detail of how this would work in practice to an agreement between the UK and a foreign state, and no assurances around oversight in terms of the inspectorate, in terms of the prison probation ombudsman, in terms of our obligations under OPCAT and the functioning of the national preventative mechanism. All of these questions are unanswered. So, and then you have obviously the kind of practical, moral and ethical questions about whether it's right that we should be sending people from the UK to foreign jurisdictions to serve their sentences, in terms of the knock-on impacts on family contact. How do we arrange for effective resettlement arrangements for those people who are released from the prison back into the UK, and the join-up of services? I think there's just so many unanswered questions in this proposal. And if you look at the experience of other countries, certainly with Norway and Belgium, who rented places from the Netherlands, in Belgium, looking at the research, it didn't actually deal with the problem of overcrowding, which can seem to have got worse in Belgium. And the situation in Norway isn't really comparable because it wasn't introduced to reduce overcrowding, but something called the prison queue system. So we just don't have the evidence that it would even necessarily achieve what the government says it wants it to achieve. And the latest case with Denmark and Kosovo is highlighting all sorts of concerns around the human rights implications of that, and the UN has just reported on its concerns on that. So I do think it's quite an extraordinary proposal. Yes, and I do sort of question how serious the government really is about pursuing it.
Very interesting. Yeah, Marsha, were the government really serious about pursuing anything apart from culture wars? But yeah, hello Reagan Elites, and also if you're not subscribed to Reagan Elites channel, please do. Always brilliant. And I had the great privilege of being invited onto his channel for a bit of a live stream where we had a good chat. Well, it was a good chat. The only downside was that Reagan Elite was talking to somebody who's in the dark. If you're going to watch that video, you'll understand why. It was it was like Reagan Elite were talking to a guy in a vampire. But anyway, yeah, One Angry Pagan, yeah. I think, yeah, I like the concept of community service. I wonder why they don't say it. It kind of reminded me when I used to work for the council. There were times, when we were doing little side jobs, they used to do the same with community service, pay the naughty boys, you could say, and they were cleaning up communities and whatnot. And to be honest, a few of them we used to have a good crack with them, and now and again I'd and it would just be a case of be there helping out take the bags away and whatever, and this and that and the other. And more often than not, if they want too many of them, I'd buy them all a breakfast or something. It's just the way it was like, and they were quite grateful, And but yeah, as I say, didn't community service help somewhat with prison capacity, but not sending people to the neck who shouldn't be there? Well, yeah, I can imagine. I bet there's a fair few who probably shouldn't be there and don't need to be there. And so yeah, I could totally understand. Yeah, community service have to be supervised by police. Yeah, I bet they do. And when you think about that, when you're having cuts in public services, it gets more expensive, I suppose. That's you probably. Hello, John. Good afternoon, all on vacation and just dropping in and lurking. Oh, no worries. Hope you're enjoying your holiday. Yeah. Anywhere nice, John? Anywhere nice? And also, yeah, better than being locked up. I suppose you can imagine, yeah. And Tony, you need to examine and work out what the purpose of prison is. Well, yeah, because, like, for too long... Hello there, my friend. Hello there. Hope you're well. But yeah, because there's no point having prisons just to lock people up, because more often than not, they're going to end up back there, aren't they? So, but yeah, some really interesting points there. But anyway, I'm chuntering, and you're not coming here to listen to me chunter and rabbit on. I'll let these guys do it for you.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing you might vigorously agree with some of what's said.
I rigorously agree.
Okay. Do add anything else if you want to. Okay, just finally from me, Chair, just conscious of time. We've talked about a lot of the government's proposals and measures that they have introduced or wanting to, but are there any other aspects of the prison system and the supporting systems around it that you think haven't been looked at or could provide some of the ways of alleviating the pressures both now and in the future on the prison service, and particularly the capacity within prisons themselves? Who wants to have a go?
Yeah, I can start. I think I raised one earlier, which is around remand, and I think we should really look hard at the use of remand, who we're remanding, why we're remanding them in custody. I think we should stop using prison as a place of safety. It's not a safe place for women, and stop imprisoning people with mental health issues. And I know that we'll probably come back to some of those questions later, but I think it's very important that we recognise that it's not a safe place. There aren't provisions to support people with mental health issues. So I think there's a few ways that we could quite quickly reduce the women's prison population, particularly on those points.
One of the things that hasn't been mentioned so far, including in the previous panel, was the commitment that the Lord Chancellor made when he announced the emergency measures in October to produce an annual statement on prison capacity. Now, I think that's a welcome measure, and I think a recognition that up to this point the government has been very poor in terms of matching projected demand to its plans to meet that. And indeed, I think anything that would improve the sort of accountability and transparency of that process would be very much welcome. I think it should go further. I know this committee has proposed that annual report should be put on a statutory basis, and I think that would be a good idea, perhaps marrying it up with a duty on the Lord Chancellor to report on the similar to how he has to on the courts, of running a decent and effective prison system. Because I think what's missing in the whole debate about capacity is decency and the treatment and conditions which we ought to expect of our prison system. At the moment, it's all about chasing the tail of increased demand and ensuring we can meet that demand. There's nothing said about that what should be the minimum standards that we expect of prisons, and so something around putting standards of decency on a statutory basis, something around reducing overcrowding as well, which has been the absolute problem within our system for decades, and it's almost in-baked that we have an overcrowded system. I'd
agree with both colleagues on those points, so I won't focus on that. But one of the things I did want to draw attention to is as well, this committee called for the publication of an ageing prisoner strategy. And it's, it's waiting publication, and it's something that we really, really need to look at in terms of population drivers, especially perhaps with this foreign prison rental scheme on the books, is how are we going to address the massive needs of an ageing prison population? And, there's a number of drivers of it, one being how we overall meet the healthcare needs of people who maybe would have died younger with poverty and disadvantage, but also people who've gone to prison for the first time in their lives, in their old age, who may be very healthy until then and will live a long time. And we have not only physically inaccessible prisons, we have no social care. Things just aren't good enough. And we need to really look at how you do that. Now, you can't do that in prisons that are totally overcrowded. So looking at alternative ways. Some of our members, for example, have tried and tested models of basically running secure care homes. And how do you provide those kind of models? The earlier panel talked about mental health treatment. We know we have members who previously took people who are drug dependent for residential rehab. That doesn't get commissioned now. The overall impact of the reduction in resources across our communities, in our social care, in our mental health, in our drug treatment services, is having a knock-on effect in driving the disadvantage and inequality in prisons. And that's really important to bear in mind, that prisons are part of communities. And if we send people there warehousing them, we stock up extra problems.
Thanks very much.
Wow. Sending people in their old age to prison as well. Wow. You think, really? Is that a right prison environment for people of that age? Yeah, I can imagine, prison does send them more mad too, sometimes. Yeah, and good evening, dodgy syrup. The man with the magnificent plumage is with us, the only man who's in the House of Lords, where himself and his magnificent plumage will get a daily payment. Good evening, Sir Michael Fabricant. Hope you're well, dodgy syrup man. But yeah, very, very interesting. It just, I was saying that old people were sent up to think, really, you think that really good, the best environment for people who are in the old age of life, I suppose. Very interesting. But anyway, less of my worshipping the dodgy syrup man.
Very much. Okay, Mr. Daly.
One of the problems with this debate is, and it's what I said to the other panel, it was ever thus. You could have been sat in front of me 15 years ago in terms of talking about prison overcrowding and inequalities and the nature of the offenders, because it hasn't changed. I was representing people 20 years ago who came from the same socio-economic background, with the same mental health challenges and with everything else like that. One of the things that frustrates me is that we shouldn't just take this in. There's all this, the public, well, certainly the majority of my constituents are interested in the concept of how they are protected from people committing offences against them. And a lot of them wouldn't recognise, clearly we want people to be treated humanely, we want people to be in conditions where rehabilitation happens. But the concept of why people are in there in the first place is the issue, rather than, obviously things that happen. And I'm really interested in this concept of that we essentially should, that short-term custodial sentences are something that we should think about maybe phasing out the system or something like that. My problem with that is quite simply this. If you decide as a state that shoplifting is an offence, shoplifting nearly all the time is committed by recidivist drug offences. And this is what my point was trying to make to the last panel. If you have somebody who commits the first offence of a serious assault in a nightclub in a certain set of circumstances, that's a serious offence. So evidence would suggest they're highly unlikely to do that again. They were a first-time offender in the 30s. If you are a repeat drug addict with 100 previous convictions, you can wish that a rehabilitation order is going to do it, but it isn't. They're going to go back out and commit another offence. So how do you, is the point that you're saying in terms of low-level offending that we just have to forgive the fact that some of the people who are in front of us are going to go back out and commit offences in the community?
No, certainly for me, this isn't about, treats for cheats and goodies for baddies. It's about, driving your car in the right gear. And I think the system is obsessed with prison. And we can't afford it, and it doesn't actually work. So if you look at recidivists who have long-term drug dependency, the issue of being sent to prison for a short sentence when you won't actually get effective treatment is what then drives that recidivism. There are actually good outcomes. There's good evidence of rehabilitation, activity requirements, ARRs, DTRs. They actually have good outcomes.
So the answer is, in what you've just said to me, that every single person who has a drug addiction needs to go to a facility where that is going to be addressed correctly, and they should not, in any circumstances, go into prison. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, not necessarily. It very much depends what crime they've committed. But prison is not going to give them drug treatment. In most cases.
What if it's protecting the public?
But for a short period of time, and then that person comes out again.
Maybe a short period of time, but it's protecting the public for a period of time. What's wrong with that?
Do the public want people to keep coming out? The public generally, if you talk to victims, for example, very keen on restorative models. If somebody comes out of prison, has gone into prison maybe with a stable family and an address, and comes out of prison with neither.
Thank you. Sonia, can I ask you a question? That you said, and it's a very, it is a, in sentiment I agree with this, but you said that people who have mental health problems should not receive a custodial sentence. Now, can you explain to me how that is actually possible to do? Because how are you going to, one, diagnose somebody with a mental health problem if they're appearing before a court prior to going into custody? And are you telling this committee that every single person, every single one, with a diagnosed mental health condition should not be in a prison environment?
So I think it's really important that the reasons people commit offences are looked at really properly. And I think that's part of the problem with the system at the moment, is that's not understood. Most of the women I have met, in fact pretty much every woman I've met in prison, has said if I'd got the support I asked for, it wasn't even that it was undiagnosed, in the community I wouldn't have committed the offence that I committed. So it's really quite important that we recognise... I
don't dispute any of that, and I think you're right. So don't think I'm disagreeing with you. You made a statement, I think it was in answer to Mr Timpson, that you said that nobody with a mental health problem should go into prison. And therefore, I'm just asking you, given evidence to a parliamentary committee, how does that possibly work? And could you just confirm that every single person with a mental health condition should not be going into custody?
What I'm saying is prisons aren't set up to support women with mental health issues. So the rates of self-harm in women's prisons is 11 times higher than in the male estate. It's a harmful place. So they need the support. They'll need the support. They might need to be excluded from society if they're a danger, but they need mental health support. And prison isn't set up to give mental health support.
I'm assuming, and it's that one of the things that courts take into consideration when somebody goes into a custodial environment is protection of the public. And I'm assuming that from all three of your perspectives, that protection of the public is an important part of the sentencing exercise. So do you feel that there is anything that can be done in terms of how courts interpret protection of the public, which may have an impact on the prison population?
I think the information provided to the courts and the support provided to the courts about deciding what happens to people and therefore to the public that they have harmed or are a risk to is something we need to look at really carefully. So pre-sentence reports, for example, have really reduced in quality. They've been affected by all sorts of drivers in the last few years. But, the number of judgments, Mr Daly, when you would have been doing this a number of years ago, it's done very differently now. People don't always appear in front of the court. The judge, the previous Chief Inspector of Probation did an inquiry into pre-sentence reports and where, for example, gender and having children is supposed to be a mitigating factor in terms of in prison. There was a number of pre-sentence reports, a very high number in the sample, that didn't state the gender.
So do you think, therefore, that the lack of appropriate information before the sentencing court in recent times is exacerbated and that people are being sent into prison because the courts don't have sufficient information upon which to make a reasoned decision? That's
And also don't necessarily have knowledge of how would you deal with that person better, and how do I have that confidence that that person isn't going to reoffend tomorrow because I've sent them out in a community order. I know they can't reoffend tomorrow if I send them to prison.
Okay. I've got two. I'm very interested in this point about parole. I'm very interested about the nature of conditions on parole, because the recalls are a major and significant number of people in prison, and I do not think the vast majority of people who are recalled are a risk to the public. And my experience, and we've had evidence given to this committee both in public like you're doing now and in camera, is that there is a very risk-averse attitude. And it's striking, because what Sonia said, is that I think that people who have mental health problems in prison, that is viewed as a risk condition in terms of them reoffending, and inappropriate conditions are imposed upon parole, which leads to inevitable breach, which leads to inevitable back in custody. And sometimes those people going back into custody can be years, having not committed a previous offence. So could you tell me, so that we can tell somebody else, what the secret is to get that right?
I mean, an area I've been looking at quite a bit recently is the IPP and the high numbers who are recalled on the IPP. And we've just had a thematic from the probation inspectorate on this very issue, and a kind of generally what it found was that while the recall decision may have been appropriate in terms of the strict following of the guidance, what was at fault was the lack of support available to people in the community in order to make a success of their release. And what we do know is that a significant number of IPPs are recalled not for committing further offences but for administrative breach.
But if people keep putting these conditions on, they're going to breach them. If you're on a 7-day-a-week curfew, or you have to go to somewhere 20 miles away for an appointment, and you don't have access to transport, you're going to breach it. And so, we talk about this, not to do, but we could talk about this forever. But how do we affect the mindset of the people who are imposing those conditions to give people a fair chance of succeeding in the community? Do you think there is a way? If there isn't, is there a way? I don't know.
I mean, I think it might also partly be a function of the pressure that the probation service is on. So I think a service under greater pressure is more likely to make decisions which might lead to recall. So I think one of the answers is to make sure that the probation service is properly resourced. And in relation to some of the demand reduction measures which the government is putting forward, I think it really does have to answer that question of how do we ensure that, if we're going to have more people supervised in the community, that probation has sufficient resource to make a success of it. Because otherwise, I think what you get will be a problem where you might be getting people coming into the system from other angles, such as through increased rates of recall.
I think there's something as well about looking at the expertise of staff. One of the possible benefits under the TR arrangement was that the National Probation Service staff were focusing more on people at higher risk. And therefore had, maybe a bit more scale, a bit more time to think about what people needed. One of the issues we have now is that we don't have a range of options. So we would say, for example, on the rehabilitative activity requirement, the RAR, it's a bit of a blanket measure. There's a lot of blanket measures in probation and around licence and recall. And to look at some of the nuances, so people, for example, on life licences, looking at how you reduce the time or how you reduce the frequency. When I've had staff in the past or they're being asked to go to meetings, there's absolutely no need. We're showing, they're not able to evidence that the stuff they do for us, how that meets some of those conditions, why those administrative burdens are there. I think really talking to people who've spent a long time on probation would be something that would, we really do need to think about it differently if we're going to make a success of everything else.
Very interesting. I have to say, the man with Angela Rayner forever stapled in the back of his head at the start, he seemed to sound quite, what's the word I'm after, as if he wasn't happy. It was quite antagonistic, I suppose that's the word. But yeah, it's lots, and I can imagine, I suppose, a place for prison. A place for people who suffer from mental health issues isn't the right and fit and proper place is prison. prison, is it? I suppose. But yes, yes. So think long prison sentence is still necessary for highly violent and sexual and murder criminals. I think we can all agree on that, can't we? Really? Otherwise, prisons should be reformed, provide real education to help with life outside prison. Totally agree with you, 100%. Yeah. So they are just going to be people you're just not going to be able to help. They're beyond help out there, and they're too much of a danger to the public. Hello, Hugh Janus. But yes, absolutely dodgy syrup. I do recognise brilliance when I see it, and that bloke, we could use a good syrup look on the of his cranium. Yes, that is one hell of a shine on his cranium. And yes, Sir Roger Gale is there with his beautiful plumage, only second to yours. Totally agree. Absolutely agree. Tell huge cranium that spectacles do not make him look more intelligent, especially when he's waving them about. No, I totally agree. Scully ignoring no one's shock. Absolutely, because he did seem quite antagonistic, as if I'm going to get you in a gotcha question, and to be honest, I thought they all handled him pretty well, and he just seemed to have calmed down as it went on, didn't it? Yes. Clearly, I'm speaking about your twin brother, huge genius. Welcome aboard. Glad to see you enjoying this. But anyway, let's get back into this.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Pat.
Thanks very much indeed. Ms. Hopkins.
Thanks. I'm going to just come back again to the impact of overcrowding on self-harm and mental health across the prison estate. So any further thoughts that you've had to what was discussed earlier?
I think as a sector, we're hugely concerned that the impact of overcrowding is felt by people in prison and by their families, and that one of the impact for us with overcrowding is combination of overcrowding and staffing, so insufficient staffing to meet the needs of an overcrowded population, is that my members can't get into prisons. And people are locked up for very long periods of time in a day with other people, maybe with other people who are also unwell, and they can't get the services that they need, and particularly bearing in mind that those services often meet those underlying drivers and underlying needs. Also concerned about where the evidence comes from. So I was at a presentation recently about assaults. And actually, can we trust the information that prisoners give us? Who are they giving that information to? You know, it would be really useful if there was more investment, I think, in organisations and in like the work that Mark and others in PRT, Revolving Doors Agency, User Voice, where you're getting information from people in prison about what the concerns are for them and what those drivers. A few years ago, Samaritans produced an assessment of why people had gone for services from listeners in prison, and it was really interesting to see what those main concerns were. And actually, it was things like debt and being in debt in prison, but also concern about your family. Yep. And if you're locked up all the time, you're overcrowded and you're not able to get out and speak to your family in a Victorian prison without in-cell telephony, then those drivers, those things are only going to get worse. But we are really concerned about those spikes in self-harm, in suicide, and we don't even know if that's a reality. We would think that the situation is actually a lot worse, because we're still not back to any sense of pre-COVID kind of day-to-day.
Can I just share a quote from a woman from prison that just sort of clarifies Anne's point, actually? She said to us, "It feels different when there's too many women in prison. You can tell. All the staff look worried, and even the good ones don't have time for you. It's like they all look like they're waiting for something bad to happen, and that leaks over to us. You start to feel like you're not safe, and women are self-harming then all the time. At night on the wings, you can just hear them poor lasses crying for help over and over."
Wow, that is, yeah. And that the woman, she goes, does the in agreement. It seems as an agreement, and you get the feeling she's probably heard this stuff a lot. And yeah, you can imagine, because there probably are a lot of good guards there who want to, make a difference, but clearly they just don't have the time, do they? And it's just brilliant. Put all into one basket, and what's been said there, and then once that happens, it just gets worse and worse and worse. So something badly is going to happen. That was just quite shocking what we heard there, wasn't it?
A lot there. Talking about self-harm, particularly amongst women, it's a lot higher than with the male estate. Again, with this increase in prison population and, any thoughts around the increased risk, particularly around women who might be wanting to access support and healthcare provision?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all the women that we speak to have said pretty much the same thing. They're not able to access the support that they need. They wait a really long time to get the support that they need. They put in an app. It takes weeks, months even to get seen. At which point they haven't got their medications. I've got a few other quotes, but I can't dig them out right now. But so it's the more women that go into prison, the less ability the staff have to cope with the issues that they're being faced with on a regular basis. And I just want to mention again the point around remand, the women I've met on remand.
Yes.
Particularly, the system is just not set up for them. The system wasn't set up for women anyway, and it's not set up for women on remand, and they fall through the gaps in the system, and it's kind of acknowledged in the prisons I've been into, oh yes, well, those women, we don't really get to them. And you get women who don't have a toothbrush for 3 weeks, who don't have trousers for 3 months. I met someone. It's appalling. So the fact that they're not even getting, the basics that they need to have their dignity, how they're going to have strong mental health and be able to access the health service is another big issue. So it's a really serious concern from our perspective.
And for all of you, again, any further observations around the facilities to support mental health or lack of?
They're just not really there, and there's not enough understanding about what the mental health needs of people are in prison and what will exacerbate those or alleviate those. And I think that we definitely pick that up all the time, talking to our members working in prison or aiming to work in prison about the impact of overcrowding on the environment. And people saying to us who've worked in prisons for 25 years, this is the first time that they themselves worry about their staff, that prisons don't feel safe, and if that's where we lived all the time. And I think particularly we really need to think about and understand as part of this inquiry the impact of being in prison in COVID on people, because there are people in prison still who were in prison for the first time in COVID in the most extraordinary circumstances. And I think if we think about mental health much more holistically as well, we go back to the remand discussion, the only thing that people on remand get really is family support or access to their family. And then families are seeing people who are really, very unwell or very concerned and not able to get the basics. That drives need for family support from our sector. The voluntary sector can be much more supportive in meeting a range of needs, and not just, the reading, the writing skill that's being commissioned, but actually having a relationship with someone who comes from outside, who's not of the system. We get beautiful transformation that happens when people work with voluntary sector staff and volunteers, and that's been proven over time. And not being able to get in and work with people and be not part of the system, but within the system, bringing light in. And bringing in additional services. So we would really be saying that we need to prioritise. How do you get voluntary organisations in? How do you coordinate them? We have a model around coordination that works really well, that had, I suppose, unpredicted positive outcomes when we did it in 3 prisons in the southwest around self-harm rates, around referral rates to mental health, because people were meeting organisations more and volunteers and talking to them about what else was going on. If you compound that with the lack of staff of experience, 30.8% I think is the rate of the average. 30.8% of prison officers have less than 3 years experience. Yep. National average.
Wow, that's a lot, isn't it? 38 point whatever of less than 3 years experience. Jesus Christ. Hello, Blue Badger 8. How are we? How was it? Where I'm absolutely fantastic. I hope you're very well. And did you miss anything? Well, this is just the second meeting in the Justice Committee on prison accommodation and the overcrowding and how much of a hellhole it is. And I totally agree with Smith. Yeah, prisons are a hellhole. Anybody who still thinks the holiday camps, I think they need their head examining. And what you did miss, you well, I suppose in a way it could be fortunate. You missed out on the man with the huge cranium, and could do with tattoo of Angela Rayner forever forged on his head because she always seemed to have been living rent free in his mind. Yes, the one and only James Daly, and just to let you know, this was on the 9th of June this year. So anyway, just a few humongous forehead badges as well, also. But all you'll see in here is a lot of foreheads as well. But for some fantastic experts as well. Have these people looked around YouTube at least in 3 languages investigating about videos and reports about British jails? I heard a comment saying better than a South African jail, but not much. Wow. I remember watching what do they call him now? It was one of the Mitchell brothers. I forgot, Ross Kemp. He used to do the things on gangs, and I remember he went to a South African prison, and it was Jesus Christ. It clearly wouldn't have been a place for the faint of heart from what I watched. Jesus, but yes, it does sound quite familiar. Anyway, let's continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say that there is a sort of commitment to provide equivalence of care in prison as in the community, and that would include mental health in terms of health services. And so mental health is and ought to be commissioned as part of general health services in prison. But the reports we get through our advice and information service, through what prisons tell us, is that the level of support just doesn't match the need that is in prison. And what we particularly hear, it's often people with low to medium level of mental health need who are neglected and who aren't getting the support they need. And an overcrowded system is more likely to make that problem worse. So inspectorate reports have reported on problems with the key worker model in overcrowded prisons when there's particularly high numbers of prisoners to staff. So you're just not able to deliver that meaningful contact between staff and prisoners, which means that problems can be picked up and acted upon. So yes, there is not the level of support for people's mental health in prison that there needs to be, and an overcrowded system makes that much harder to deliver.
And just building on the points you said about activities, contact, a good regime, but obviously the impact of overcrowding and increased prisoners to staff or staffing issues. What sort of impact does that have then with the increase in overcrowding and staffing issues on having a good regime?
That was the first thing to go, really, isn't it? And we saw that, I suppose, en masse. It was almost like a national project in COVID, that, regime was the first thing to go. And I think there's some really good work happening. So there is a overall project around regimes, and come April, every prison should have a new tiered regime. And it's very, it's sound in terms of the model that you would have. Tier 1, it's fairly similarly based to systems like what have been created around health visiting and disabled children and SEND. But that you would have a kind of a universal offer regime for people, and then people with identified additional needs will get tier 2 level support. Now this is really good. It's been consulted on extensively with our sector, but prisons are now supposed to be introducing models for April, and what we are hearing is that that's not happening, that's not being developed. And I think the potential of that missed opportunity is phenomenal. There's a huge level still of very long lockdown and bang up. And then you've got very inexperienced staff in that, to have that confidence to be able to put on regime to work with, to develop relationships with prisoners then that, you know, can be red banded or to work in a more autonomous way across prisons. There's an impact as well on the peer-led work. You know, there's been a lot of investment over the years in really good peer-led models. Now, when you've got a staffing shortage, having seasoned and skilled and well-trained and well-supported peers is an obvious way of I suppose, compensating for that, but also giving people useful skills and giving people somebody who looks like them, sounds like them. You know, we've got massive issues about race and diversity in our prison staffing compared with the disproportionate population. But we now can't get people unlocked to do their peer jobs. You know, and that then impacts on whether somebody's on enhanced status and all those things. And it does feel, you know, a bit of a never-ending crisis in many ways. But there are models in which the regime could work quite well, and regimes could be very purposeful. But we can't, you know, we can't get people in. We can't get people vetted at the moment. We have a massive crisis in our sector around staff and volunteers being vetted to go in, with some extra kind of punition added in about needing to get people vetted to different levels and for different establishments. And very happy to send a document to the committee on that, because, you know, there's a lot of practical things that need to be done to make regimes work better. But I'd also commend a report done by the Traveller Movement, one of our members, on the issues around purposeful activity for people from Gypsy Roma traveller communities. So, you know, all the thing about how you schedule activities, how you get things done, that all of those in an overcrowded, understaffed, underexperienced staff model, you're not going to be able to achieve. And I really would say to prison governors, they need to work more with their voluntary sector partners about the knowledge. You've got people working in prisons longer than the governor's been there, you know, and the knowledge that those people have needs to be tapped up.
Okay.
Hello there, my friend Harry Barr Stewart. Has my cousin Larry been in here? I take it you mean our Sir Larry the cat. Yes, he's been in, and he's been marking up all the people with the unfeasibly large foreheads, especially our James Daly. Hope you're well, Harry Barr Stewart. But yeah, you do. You see, it's all like recognise a pattern of overcrowding, understaffed, and I suppose in a way it's what do you expect after 14 years, I suppose. But Marcia, you get the feeling it probably would have been even longer than that, because like you still hear that stuff, and it tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, and then lock them away and throw away the key nonsense. You hear it all the time, don't you? But very interesting. But I'll say hello, Harry Barr Stewart. Hope you're well.
All right. Good. Anything else? Anything else? No? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Just a couple more things before we need to finish, because we've got some votes coming up. Again, an issue that you probably heard raised, I think you raised it earlier, Rachel, yourself, it was this issue around maintenance backlogs. Any assessment from your perspectives and your organisations about the impact that the maintenance backlogs are having?
Two things we hear about would be that we would have organisations that are commissioned to deliver family services, and also to deliver like education interventions and classrooms and visit halls and visit centres. Often, you know, they're heavy traffic spaces, and there have been a lot of issues around how you get that maintenance and that general maintenance done. A lot of them kind of out of commission, can't be used, or might be being used for different things because of overcrowding, you know. So there is a lack of facility because you can't get the maintenance done in that way.
Okay, great. Sonia, any thoughts from
only to say that I think if the female offender strategy were successful and there was a reduction in the women's prison population, we would need less investment. Our interest is more to reduce the women's population and have less need to invest in the prison estate itself.
Now, Mark, I mean, you raised this in your evidence, and you might have a general view, but also you raised this question about the privatisation of the maintenance contract.
Yes, indeed. We're speaking to governors who were actually governing at the time when the contracts were introduced. One of the impacts seems to have been that in the run-up to the contracts actually being privatised, And because there were rumours that it was going to happen, there was a recruitment freeze in terms of people bought in to deliver maintenance on the estate. And so when the private contract took over, there had then been a built-in problem in terms of growing problems of maintenance on the estate. So clearly there was a failure to properly plan for the impact of a privatised contract coming in to taking over the maintenance. The National Audit Office has done a report on this, a very good report looking at the deficiencies with the contracts. Clearly they were introduced in order to improve efficiencies. That didn't happen. One of the providers went bankrupt as a result of taking on the contract. So clearly there are lessons to be learnt from what happened with that, and also very well documented problems with how the contract is constructed in terms of the lack of autonomy governors seem to have under those contracts to actually deliver improvements in their prisons, and just not having the autonomy to be able to do that.
Okay, that's helpful. Finally,
just say a point on that, Sir Bob. Just quickly, contracting in prisons. Public service contracting, not just for maintenance, but really needs to be looked at more broadly about how do you effectively allow prison governors and people commissioning within prisons to get what they need for the people that they are supporting, and how do they then work with the best partners? My sector consistently experiences just horrendous problems in being commissioned and getting to do the work. We've just recently met with a previous prison minister who's now charity minister about the issues of how we think that contracts are deliberately underpriced when they're going to be let to the voluntary sector because the subsidisation is so high. So during COVID we had a massive issue when the previous family and significant other services contracts, or the family contracts, enabled the provider to take X money for the contract and then Y from the sale of goods and services and tea and coffee and Capri Sun in the tea bars. So obviously then when the COVID came, they couldn't open their tea bars, so they needed to get subsidisation, they needed to get contract relief. And some of those organisations nearly went under before we were able to get that contract relief. And we really need to look at how you develop the best processes and the best contracts in a way, and grant systems that will enable prisons to have what they need from local providers and specialist providers.
That's very interesting. And then the final thing, we had a discussion with the previous panel. Mr. Taylor, the current Chief Inspector of Prison, says you think she should close 1 in 10 prisons, and he particularly points the finger at the old inner city Victorian prisons. What's your take on both those points? A, should we be closing 1 in 10, and B, are the Victorian era prisons the right ones?
Sir Roger Gale there looks so relaxed and so chilled, hey. he looks horizontal, doesn't he? He's practically near enough for sleep.
Who wants to try any views on that?
I think I don't think you can make a sort of blanket condemnation of all Victorian prisons. I mean, there are some pluses to the Victorian prisons in terms of location, particularly closeness to home. But there is no doubt in terms of maintenance, in terms of getting them up to spec, in terms of technology, internet, etc. There's really big challenges there. And also, prison design has moved on. Victorian prisons were built for their time. They were designed to send out quite a punitive message. Now, a lot of the debate in terms of prison design is around having trauma-informed environments, and clearly Victorian prisons would not be designed for that purpose. So there is no doubt that a lot of that Victorian stock are not fit for purpose, but I wouldn't want to lose some of the benefits, particularly around location and size, that sort of thing.
Okay. Sonia, any particular thought?
I think it probably relates more to the male estate than the female estate. But I mean, again, my point is the same really, which is we really want to see the prison population be dramatically reduced, and closing prisons is a good thing as long as they're not replaced by more prisons. And we want the investment in the community where the underlying issues that women are facing are tackled at root within the community.
There was an issue raised when Holloway was closed about travel distances, for example, for families. I think most of the prisoners went to Downview, didn't they? Which was
Bronzefield, yeah.
Yeah, Bronzefield. Yeah, Bronzefield.
And the cost of visiting and all of those
yeah.
things. I think, we've kind of closed the only local, as it were, women's prison in the whole of England and Wales. I think that for us, with everybody else, we would reduce the need for that number of prisons. But I think what's really important is making sure that we have places of safety and places of appropriate nature to meet the needs of the people who are sent there, so that they never go back to anywhere like that again and go back into their community safely, that are close to the things that they will need and the lives we want them to lead in the future. One of the issues we have at the moment as well is not just these tightened prisons that are that are so far from anything else, but you have people now, I was in a prison in the northeast, and a young man asked me where he was. He was from London, and I said where he was. And he said, "Yeah, but where is that?" He had no idea, and he was hundreds of miles from where he would be going back to, because he's serving a long sentence and moving around the country. But, the kind of services that people will need, the staff population. You have people. I was in that prison. The majority of the young men on the wing where I was were black. And the majority of staff certainly were not. So how do we make sure that we have places that are rehabilitative in nature and that are linked into the community, and people can be visited by their family, can go in and out to work on Rottle and the different schemes that we have. So that's really what I'd be looking at, is how you make your prison part of your community.
Thank you all very much, and that's been very helpful. Very grateful to you for taking the time to come and give evidence to us this afternoon. And if there is any follow-up you want to send us, Anne and anyone else, any of the rest of you.
And we'll leave that there with our very, very spaced out Roger Gale. I had to chuckle looking at some of the times where he's just saying, all was missing was a big, fat, massive one, Yeah, guys, what have we got to say? Yeah. But yeah, yes. Just imagine that Gale geezer with a Mohican haircut. Yes, I can imagine, reflection from the bonds is blinding me. I know what you mean. If that was rather a bright bonds, I know I'm bald as a badger, but all I'm going to say is not as that shiny. Good evening, Suzanne DW. Hope you're very, very well. Hope you're very well. Just a little bit late, unfortunately, but never mind. Never mind. Glad to see you. Hope you're really, really well. But yes, I know what you mean. Harry Barster, good evening, Vic, and geezer behind with a beard. Yes, I would try to think what sort of person he reminds me of. Yeah, he does have that vicar look about him, doesn't he? And with a slight little flare of Captain Peacock. But yeah, privatising prisons, so give it to people that interested in having the maximum number of people jailed for maximum profit. Well, that would work, wouldn't it? Yeah, because they're not really interested in rehabilitation. It's all about making as much money as they possibly can in it. Absolutely agree, Harry Barsteward. Roger Gale is far too happy to be passing around that wacky backer. Yes. I wonder if he might have passed Argovy in the bogs, and he said, "Hey, Gale, have a little test of that game, mate. It's knockout gear." You can just imagine it. Yes, and say yes. And Suzanne W. agrees. Yeah, the US did this, and now they have the largest prison populations. Yeah, people always talk about the death penalty, and all that stuff, and just say, well, it doesn't really work in America, does it? Really, some things have to be done in the United States. Responsibility and administrating justice, prisons being one of it, can never leave the states. And yeah, I think you've got something there, because if it's like you see all these when they go out and they know they've got no future, because you try getting a job and you've got a criminal record, it's nigh on impossible. What else are you going to do? So federal prison isn't a thing in the USA. Objective relevance. And good evening all, and good evening to you, Leah Vickerman. Hope you're very, very well. Yes, Harry Bastard. That damn Tommy will be in the shite then won't he? Yes, he'll be in the shite. Well, I have heard that he has been arrested. Has he been arrested? I really hope so. I watch a lot on replays these days. Glad to hear, my friend. Good you well. But yes, you know, I remember watching this meeting all the way through, and I just watched with fascination, because there's one thing I always like. He's the good side of this stuff like this. You find out some interesting stuff, and when you got all these experts who know what they're talking about, but instead the downside, more often than not, they don't do that very well, because for the simple reason, people just don't watch them. So that's could not leave Canada. It's what a shame. Can they keep him over there? You know, that true patriot. Yes. But yeah, I watch fascinating, and the thing that always seemed to be the recurring theme into, you know, overcrowding and understaffed. The defender of the rights was using his Irish passport and lied about when he was born. You mean our Tommy 10 names told a whopper? You do surprise me. I am shocked. Can't you tell? But yeah, you just seem to hear that recurring theme of, you know, understaffed, overpopulated, and yeah, he did, didn't he? He did like the fight, and him and his and our Nigel Foghorn of ignorance. I have to say, I had a little look of a tweet from our 30p Lee. He seems to have this strange notion that the Conservatives should listen more to Nigel Farage. You know, that man who gets all his information from Andrew Tate, and he's massively loved by Vladimir Putin. I think I put something. I think you're missing the elephant in the room. It's not reform the Tories should be worried about. It's the Lib Dems. I think you're outstating your importance, my friend. Yeah, Quebec has a lovely cell waiting for him. Yes, I hope they keep Tommy 10 names there. Hope they treat him with absolute travesty by taking his phone off him so he can't set it all up, you know, get himself all absolutely high on whatever he takes, and then scream down the phone with his eyes bulging out. Yeah, but the ones defending him must be very happy. Now, is it true that I heard he were in a curry house somewhere in Spain, trying to get in contact, talking about nobody wants to represent him? What a shame! What a shame! I'm devastated for him. And to listen to from our Jew first you first have to understand what the heck is he talking about. Why is he not in Clacton? Yes, the Clacton man. Well, see, the thing is, when the time he does go into hiding, I think the first place to look is Clacton. Because that should be the very first place he should be hiding. Because as far as I know, I still don't think anybody has found out where his surgery is, and people try to get in contact with him still, and they can't get any information from him. They tried to reform base as well. Where's our Nige based in Clacton? No reply. Well, all I can say is to Clacton, I hope you're pleased with your purchase. See, the thing is, we were not shocked, are we, really? We all could tell this was going to happen, and he was never going. He's no interest in representing the people of Clacton. And again, they've been, conned by a grifter. But yes, never mind. But I'd say, I'd love to know what your thoughts and what you watched, because. I have to say that statement that woman said was what that woman said. But what's it like in the I think it was a female prison, if I remember rightly. That's quite shocking, isn't it? As it kind of reminds me that we seem to have this strange notion that prison should be just a place for punishment, and it shouldn't be, really. It should be, yeah, first and foremost, yeah, if you broke the law and you've got to go to prison, so, but it should be for rehabilitation as well, isn't it? Because we all deserve second chances, don't we? Yes, Clacton man with his mate Laputin. Yes, totally and utterly agree. Yes. Yeah, so I've heard things are not going well for our Putin at the same time. I don't sort of like keep a little half eye on what's happening in Ukraine, but more often than not, stuff like that. It's usually full of, you get a load of disinformation, and you're not right sure what information you're listening to is right and what. It kind of reminds me. When I once on Facebook, I can't remember what, sort of like maybe a friend request, whatever, some geezer or whatever. And I think it was about the time when the Ukraine war first started, and he was proper down the rabbit hole, the proper doing the Putin selling points, and saying all these videos that you see, people in Ukraine running away and all that. All these were all staged and whatnot, and saying, "Don't believe what you hear about Putin. He's the savior." And this, and I went, "Unfriended. See you later. I'm off." It's all like, just don't make any small jerky movements. Just look at them, slightly wave, and then disappear back in the bush. Like Homer Simpson did. Yes. He borrowed a friend's passport when he was in Spain, so not the first time he's mucked around concerning international travel. Is that right, Susan DW? Really? Yeah, I've got one or two friends who worship the ground he walks about. I saw on my Facebook page a couple of them who were down in London a couple of weeks ago, and because he was airing his wonderful film in London or whatever. I think they're bonkers, like, but can't tell people, can't. But if that's clearly, it's obviously it's true then, because I'm sure, like you said, he's done it before. The reptile overlord is MIA shocker. Yes. Yeah. ETS. Yeah. That is why ETS will be excellent to deal with people like him. Yeah, I suppose it would be, won't it? Ah, yes. no doubt he'll tell all his cult followers that I'm being persecuted. I'm here to tell you the truth. Don't you realise I'm here to protect you from the hooded claw? Keep the vampires from your door. Aye, aye, aye. Sorry. But, pay me some money. Pay me some money for all this protecting I'm due to you. Yes. I'll read this last one. The needed reforms would cost money and they will never enact them. Too much money to be made. Yeah, probably right. Yeah, probably. I think you probably got a point. It's usually always down to money, isn't it, in most things? And when it came to this extreme Tory government, they were more interested in basically just look after our donors. But anyway, what I will do is I shall leave the video here. What an idiot. I shall leave the live stream here. And just before I go, will Regan Late be doing a live stream tonight? I'm sure he will be. Because I know he does most during the day. I think it's either could be about, is it 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock? So if he's on tonight, hopefully we will see you there, and hopefully. Oh, good. Glad you enjoyed it. Glad you enjoyed it, John. Really appreciate that. It's the thing is, when it comes to these, a lot of these, I could make a couple of videos, and more often than not, they don't really do anything. So, and if I'm honest, I found this whole select committee meeting very interesting, very interesting. But anyway, I shall bid you farewell, and if Regan Elite's doing a live stream tonight, hopefully see you there. That's if I remember myself. You know what my brain's like. It's absolutely useless sometimes. But anyway, thanks for stopping by. Right. Is it 8 o'clock? Right. All right. Cheers for that. I'll make a mental note or put a sticky down on that. Right. Oh, don't worry about it. Susan DW. Is glad to see you and hope you're doing real well. But anyway, see you all, and